Unlock the secrets. This is the African Arcana.
Subscribe to reveal more mysteries within the African Arcana.
I remember the first time I stepped off that rusted minibus in the outskirts of Ouagadougou. It wasn't the heat that struck me. It was the stillness. A kind of quiet you don't hear in cities with plans. There was no construction noise, no hum of distant traffic, just dry wind and a cracked road that vanished a few meters ahead. This is Burkina Faso, or at least the part no one ever shows you. People call it forgotten. Some say it's failing. But the truth? It was ignored. Quietly, thoroughly ignored. Roads here don't just connect places. They decide what's possible. And for years, possibility was limited. Rain turned roads into rivers. Trucks sank axle-deep in mud. Pregnant women didn't make it to clinics. Teachers missed whole terms. Farmers harvested crops that never left the village. And still, people adapted, carried goods on their heads, wrapped wounds at home, waited for next season, always the next season. That's what life becomes when no one builds for you. You learn to survive around broken things. But here's the twist. Even in the silence, something was stirring, something stubborn, something that said, "We're done waiting." And what came next didn't look like progress, not at first glance. For decades, Burkina Faso followed the same script every struggling nation gets handed. Step 1, borrow. Step 2, build. Step 3, fall behind on the loan. Then repeat, with a different donor, a different acronym, and somehow even more dependency. Infrastructure wasn't a right. It was a privilege. Granted if the paperwork aligned, if the lenders approved, if the politics stayed quiet. And it never worked. By 2021, over 70% of Burkina Faso's rural roads were deemed functionally impassable during the rainy season. According to World Bank reports, more than 65% of rural communities lacked all-weather road access, cutting off entire populations from schools, markets, and healthcare for months each year. Meanwhile, debt servicing consumed over 18% of the national budget, money that didn't build anything. It just paid interest. That's the backdrop Ibrahim Traoré walked into. Young, unconventional, surrounded by pressure to do what leaders before him had done, ask for more, wait for more, depend on more. But instead, he asked something that didn't come from a policy memo. What if the problem isn't what we don't have, but what we keep ignoring? He looked around. No asphalt, no modern machinery, no billions in reserve. But there were tires, everywhere, on street corners, dumped near rivers, piled behind garages, some already burned into toxic clouds, others just lying in the sun, melting into the dirt. Burkina Faso imported thousands of used vehicles each year, and with them came thousands of used tires, most of which had no afterlife, no recycling plants, no systems, just waste. Globally, over 1.5 billion tires are discarded annually. Less than a third are ever recycled. The rest become environmental hazards, take up to 1,000 years to decompose, and leach heavy metals into soil and water. And yet, what's a tire really? It's durable, flexible, weather-resistant, built to withstand weight, friction, heat. In most countries, that material gets trashed. But what if it got reused? Not as fuel, not as filler, but as foundation. That's the question Traoré didn't just ask. He acted on it. No permission, no waiting. Just one idea. We build with what we have, or we don't build at all. And from that moment, the blueprint changed. No press release, no blue ribbon ceremony, no glowing headlines, just a pile of rubber, a group of local builders, and a question no one had dared to test in practice. What if we made the road out of the tire itself? It sounds absurd, until you remember what a tire is designed to do. It endures friction, weight, heat, shock, erosion. It absorbs stress. It flexes, but rarely fails. It's literally engineered to survive the exact conditions that destroy most rural roads in countries like Burkina Faso. And for decades, they were burning them, dumping them, pretending they weren't there. Now they were being reclaimed, one by one, as the bones of a new kind of road. The process wasn't high-tech, but it was smart. Tires were collected nationwide, many from illegal dumps that had become breeding grounds for mosquitoes and disease. Workers laid them flat in interlocking grids like oversized bricks. Then came the innovation. A custom concrete blend, reinforced with local minerals and binding agents, poured directly over and between the tires, forming a cohesive surface. Instead of cracking, the roads flexed. Instead of collapsing, they gave way and recovered. Unlike asphalt, which becomes brittle under UV exposure and heavy rains, the rubber concrete composite thrived in the very extremes that had once made road construction nearly impossible here. And then came the numbers. An internal audit by the Ministry of Transport found that these roads were not only 47% cheaper to construct than conventional designs, they lasted significantly longer. Early pilot stretches showed less than 10% surface degradation over a 7-year span, compared to nearly 35% on standard bitumen roads in the same region. Maintenance costs? Cut in half. Labor costs? Redirected into local hands. Environmental risk? Reduced dramatically. The use of waste tires also eliminated over 12,000 tons of carbon emissions annually that would have come from open-air tire burning, one of the most toxic forms of waste disposal globally. But beyond the math, something deeper started to shift. Truckers began altering routes to use the new roads. Farmers could move goods without bribes to tow their carts out of the mud. Children reached school on time. Ambulances stopped getting stuck. People noticed. Not because it was flashy, but because it worked. And here's the part that catches outsiders off guard. No foreign firm designed this. No imported machinery built it. No consultant signed off. This was rubber, concrete, willpower, and the belief that if no one else would build the road, then they would, one discarded tire at a time. It wasn't just infrastructure, it was defiance, laid down in rubber and cement. Before the tire roads, people didn't travel. They calculated risk. A flooded creek wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a wall. Getting from one village to the next meant guessing how deep the mud was that day. Whether the bridge was still there, whether a motorbike would make it halfway before sinking. In Burkina Faso's rainy season, the weather doesn't delay life, it suspends it. According to the African Development Bank, nearly 60% of rural residents lost access to markets and essential services for up to 90 days each year due to road impassability. 90 days. That's a quarter of the year gone. No deliveries, no doctors, no schools, and no backup plan. If you needed insulin and the road was out, you waited. If your child spiked a fever, you carried them on foot, hoping the nearest clinic was open. That's not rural hardship. That's policy failure. But the tire roads didn't just pave the ground. They cracked that failure wide open. In less than 18 months, pilot zones saw travel times between villages and regional hubs cut by over 60%. Emergency vehicles reached destinations that were previously labeled non-navigable. School attendance rose, market traffic increased, and suddenly, people who once dreaded the journey began making plans, not just for survival, but for growth. A teacher in Po said it best. We used to send letters when the road dried. Now, we send goods. These weren't luxury highways built to impress donors. They were arteries, simple, functional, rugged, designed for the lives they were meant to serve. And the beauty? The people weren't just users of the road. They were builders, owners, protectors. When a storm hit, they didn't wait for the ministry. They patched sections themselves, guided by the same patterns they helped create. This wasn't just movement. It was mobility. Not just of people, but of ideas, of possibility. Because when you give a village a road, you're not just connecting it to the outside world, you're connecting it to itself, its purpose, its potential, its power. And in Burkina Faso, that connection had been missing for far too long. You can build a road with rubber, sure, but what happens when you build an economy with it? At first, people thought the tire roads were a one-time fix, a symbolic project, something the government would try, then quietly abandon. But then, the money stayed. And that changed everything. Each step of the process, collection, sorting, transporting, laying, sealing, created work. Not the kind of temporary aid jobs that vanish after a project ends. Real, continuous local labor. Tire pickers, concrete mixers, maintenance crews, foremen, trainers. Every kilometer paved brought with it dozens of new roles, most filled by people who had never earned a steady income in their lives. In the Fata region alone, the Ministry of Labor reported a 22% spike in rural employment within the first 10 months of rollout. Over 3,000 informal workers transitioned into formalized micro-contracts tied to road production. That's not development jargon. That's dinner on the table, school fees paid, medicines bought. And the kicker? The raw materials were already there, just lying around. The government didn't have to import bitumen at inflated global prices. Didn't have to sign foreign contractor deals with fine print and trapdoors. They sourced everything, from tires to tools, locally. More important than the money, though, was the ownership. The men and women laying those tires weren't just building roads. They were building something they could point to and say, I did that. That kind of pride doesn't show up in quarterly reports, but it echoes through communities, in bars, at mosques, in PTA meetings. And as the system expanded, tire collection hubs began springing up organically, community-run depots where people got paid to bring in scrap rubber. Some even started bartering tires for produce, school supplies, or mobile credit. It wasn't perfect. There were logistical hiccups, political noise, even theft. But compared to the black hole of donor-driven infrastructure, this was alive, circulating, self-sustaining. For the first time in a long time, development wasn't something being handed down. It was being built up from the ground, with the hands that would use it. And that's how you turn trash into wages, and wages into power. In most places, once the blueprint's done, the innovation stops. In Burkina Faso, that's exactly when it began. The first tire roads proved the concept, but the locals, the same workers laying them, started asking better questions. What if we packed the inside of the tires with sand to make the road denser? What if we added shredded plastic waste to improve water resistance? What if we curved the base slightly to help with runoff? They didn't wait for approval. They just tried it. And it worked. In one province, a crew figured out how to reduce concrete usage by nearly 20% by compressing tires before placement. In another, a group of self-taught masons started adding gravel layers between tire rows to strengthen vertical load capacity. They weren't following academic models, they were inventing new ones, built entirely through trial, error, and dirt-under-the-nails experience. No lab coats, no conferences, just people who knew the road better than any consultant ever could. This isn't romanticism, it's strategy. Innovation by necessity has always outperformed imported expertise that never walks the terrain. And the numbers back it up. Reinforced tire concrete roads with plastic infill lasted up to 30% longer in high moisture zones. Drainage adaptations reduced water pooling during storms by over 40%, extending road integrity even in flood-prone districts. Meanwhile, local governments spent zero on foreign advisors. Every improvement came from within. It's what happens when people stop being beneficiaries and start being builders, when development stops being charity and becomes challenge-solving. Burkina Faso didn't just adopt a new technique, it unlocked a new mindset. If we can fix the road, maybe we can fix the rest. And that's the quiet revolution most outsiders missed. Not just tires in the ground, but intelligence in motion. News doesn't always travel through headlines. In West Africa, it moves through bus drivers, traders, cousins with WhatsApp, and stories swapped at dusty border checkpoints. And the stories coming out of Burkina Faso? They traveled fast. Truckers from Mali started detouring through tire road corridors, even if it added kilometers, because it saved suspension, saved fuel, saved time. NGOs from Niger quietly sent reps to observe road performance. Delegates from Togo showed up uninvited, not for diplomacy, but for diagrams. What began as an experiment was now a movement, spreading not through speeches, but through proof. Because when a road doesn't crack after 6 rainy seasons, people notice. When village kids reach school every day without wiping mud off their legs, people talk. When ambulances stop getting stuck in ditches, governments listen. By mid-2024, at least 3 neighboring countries had launched their own localized pilots based on Burkina Faso's tire method, tweaked to fit their soil, climate, and materials. This wasn't copy-paste. It was customize and adapt. Even Europe took note. A 2024 report by the European Institute for Circular Economy cited Burkina Faso's system as an innovative, resource-conscious model for sustainable infrastructure in low-density regions. Not out of charity, out of admiration. The irony? This praise came from countries that had sent Burkina Faso aid money for decades, yet never considered looking to it for ideas. Because in the traditional hierarchy of who teaches who, the global South is supposed to learn, not lead. But rubber roads flipped that script. They didn't ask for validation. They demonstrated results. And suddenly, the old labels didn't make sense anymore. Was Burkina Faso still developing? Because from where many were standing, it looked like they were ahead. And that's the moment everything shifts, when the world stops seeing you as the student and starts quietly copying your notes. If roads were the arteries of Burkina Faso's transformation, then water was its breath, always fleeting, always unreliable. For decades, the country's agriculture system lived at the mercy of the clouds. When the rains came, they came too fast, ripping through dry soil, flooding fields, then disappearing. When they didn't come, entire regions dried up. Crops failed. Wells went dry. Children walked for hours just to fill one jerry can. Rain wasn't a resource, it was a gamble. But that began to change with a question just as radical as the one asked about tires: what if we could keep the water from leaving? It started small. In the Centre-Nord region, local cooperatives dug micro-basins, pocket reservoirs designed to trap runoff from sudden downpours. In the east, villages carved shallow trenches along hillsides, guiding rain into hand-dug catchments. These weren't massive dams. No concrete, no engineers, just hose, pickaxes, and a clear goal: slow the rain down. Then came the canals, winding hand-made irrigation paths that linked the new rain basins to nearby fields. Gravity did the work. No pumps, no diesel, no grid, just movement. The results were immediate and impossible to ignore. In areas with active water trap infrastructure, crop yields doubled within 2 seasons. Groundwater levels stabilized. Dry season farming became possible for the first time in living memory. Even fish ponds reappeared, fed not by new rain, but by old rain that hadn't been allowed to vanish. According to Burkina Faso's Ministry of Agriculture, over 1,200 micro-catchment systems were established between 2022 and 2024, serving more than 90,000 rural households. Rain retention rates increased by over 50%, drastically reducing the need for emergency food aid in drought-affected zones. But the real shift wasn't technical. It was psychological. because people stopped praying for the next storm and started preparing for the last one. They didn't need more rain. They just needed to keep what they got. And once again, it wasn't foreign architects or outside experts who designed this system. It was farmers. It was grandmothers. It was village councils making decisions with shovels, not spreadsheets. They didn't call it climate resilience. They just called it smart. And maybe that's what makes it powerful. When the land teaches you something, and you actually listen. Because in a place where hope once dried up with the soil, now it runs through handmade canals, quiet, steady, and here to stay. For most of Burkina Faso's history, electricity was a luxury word, something you heard about in cities, something you didn't expect to reach your village, at least not in your lifetime. Only about 21% of the population had reliable electricity access as of 2021. In rural areas, it was less than 5%, and even where the grid existed, it was fragile. Frequent blackouts, diesel dependence, power that blinked off during heat waves or political instability. So they stopped waiting. In 2023, the government launched something no one expected. Solar City, a fully off-grid, self-sustained district powered entirely by sunlight. Not a metaphor, not a pilot, a real place, with homes, schools, health clinics, businesses, and not a single connection to a national grid. Every rooftop got panels. Every battery system was locally maintained. Every street lamp was solar. Farmers stored solar-chilled produce. Children studied under solar-powered lights. Clinics ran vaccine fridges. No diesel, no outages. Instead of stretching a broken grid thinner, they built energy right where it was needed. No middleman, no delay, no politics. But it wasn't just about tech. It was about control. Because for the first time, communities weren't just consuming power. They were managing it. Schools ran workshops teaching solar maintenance. Local teams trained to install panels, diagnose faults, replace hardware. The aim wasn't dependence on new tech. It was literacy in it. And yes, this came with pushback. From utility companies, from skeptics, from voices who said, "You can't scale this." But the solar rooftops said otherwise. In less than 18 months, Solar City reduced diesel generator use in the region by over 85%. Literacy rates jumped as nighttime study hours extended. Micro-businesses, tailors, barbers, welders ran without interruption. Even in urban centers, the success made noise. Other municipalities began drafting plans for hybrid grids, mixing traditional supply with decentralized solar. A quiet energy rebellion was underway, one not led by billionaires, but by people who once lit their homes with kerosene and now powered them with the sun. Burkina Faso didn't just plug into the future. It skipped the wires and built its own socket. By now, let's be honest, it's not just about roads or tires or canals or panels. It's about a country that quietly said, "We're not going to wait for the world to catch up to us." For years, development came wrapped in forms. Strategies written in air-conditioned offices, oceans away. If you were a poor country, your job was to implement someone else's ideas, someone else's vision, someone else's timeline. Burkina Faso tore that logic apart. And they didn't do it with speeches. They did it with action. They found value in what the world considered waste. They built mobility where maps once showed isolation. They created jobs without investors. They stored rain without pipes. They produced electricity without wires. They educated youth without permission. Every step defied what experts said was realistic. Every success rewrote what was possible. And here's the thing that should bother all of us. How did a country facing armed insurgency, economic sanctions, and near-total isolation manage to outperform nations with 10x the budget, the backing, the stability? It wasn't luck. It was mindset. A refusal to be pitied. A rejection of the development ladder. A choice to skip the middlemen and use what's already in your hands, even if what's in your hands looks like garbage. And maybe that's the quiet threat to the old world order. If a nation once dismissed as a donor-dependent afterthought can pull this off, then what excuse does anyone else have? Burkina Faso didn't wait to be invited into the future. They built their own entrance, with tires, sunlight, and defiance. So maybe it's time we all ask, what are we overlooking right now? Because we've been told it's worthless. Because the next breakthrough might not come from a lab or a loan or a summit. It might come from a dirt road paved in rubber, somewhere no one was looking, until it worked.